Welcome, everyone. My name is Zach Miller with Landmark Ventures, host of the Social Innovation Summit. The Social Innovation Summit is a platform designed to elevate groundbreaking ideas and innovative leaders who are changing the world for the better. Throughout the year, we're honored to partner with great organizations to amplify conversations and explore solutions around the biggest issues of the day. That's why we've teamed up with AARP on a digital event series to talk with industry leaders about issues that impact longer and healthier lives for all communities, and that elevate the national dialogue around equitable longevity outcomes. Last month, our series became a summit, virtual of course, hosted across 2 days of dynamic, thought-provoking content from esteemed speakers such as Paul Farmer, Ava DuVernay, and more. It was truly a special event. Today, we're excited to continue the conversation and continue to reimagine a future that ensures all people have an equal opportunity to make the most of a longer and healthier life. We've sent all attendees a digital brochure with the agenda for today, and we're taking questions from the audience that our speakers will answer towards the end of the discussion. So please submit your questions for our speakers through the Zoom Q&A throughout the event, starting now. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome our host for today's event, the Senior Vice President for Global Thought Leadership at AARP, Dr. Jean Accius.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am extremely excited for what is going to be a very thought-provoking conversation today. As you may know, we started on this journey back in May to really have a conversation in terms of how do we start to build and incorporate equity as part of the recovery in light of what we've seen with the pandemic. And over the course of these last couple of months, we've engaged with major global leaders, change makers, influencers around this central question around building and rebuilding and ensuring that as we move forward, that equity is part of the recovery, as part of the strategy for ensuring that we can all live longer, healthier, more productive lives. Today is no exception. I'm extremely honored to have with us today Kevin Turpin II, who's the president of the National Journal. I'm a big fan of Kevin. He's done some tremendous work, and I've had an opportunity to follow him from afar. And then Gary Fraser, who's the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at NYU, who brings a tremendous amount of insights, both in terms of the work that he's done in private industry, and of course, the work that he's doing in NYU. To hear their insights in terms of how can leaders drive change in private sector and build a diverse workforce that provides economic opportunity to a diverse array of communities. As Zach indicated, a couple of weeks ago, we hosted a 2-day virtual summit. And one thing that was extremely clear from our all panel of speakers was that leadership matters and that many of the challenges that we face really will require greater collaboration. Whether it was General Colin Powell that talked about the importance of leadership and thinking about the role that leaders play both in their organizations and society more broadly, or whether it was Magic Johnson that talked about the need to assess the composition of the workforce and build a diverse pipeline, or whether it was Ava DuVernay who talked about really thinking about what it means to be healthy and to age and longevity and the intersections of those three, and what do we need to do in order to ensure that future generations can actually benefit. What's been clear across all of those conversations is the fact that we have a tremendous opportunity before us. And that opportunity really will require all of us to be very thoughtful, very intentional, and very strategic about operationalizing a plan that embeds equity as part of our organizational DNA, and then of course, as part of our societal DNA. So with that, I am extremely honored to kick off the conversation, and I'd like to bring Kevin to the stage. As I indicated before, Kevin is the president of the National Journal. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you today and have this conversation, which is an important conversation that I think many in corporate America and throughout industry are having. So excited to have it with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for being part of the conversation. I want to kind of first start off, as I mentioned in the opening, that 2020 has been quite a year with the pandemic and the range of crises that we are facing as a nation. And I wanted to start off and ask you, how are you doing and how have you been managing through this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, in all of my communications with our members, and that's what our language for clients at National Journal, because we look at it as a partnership, and with my staff, you really do have to start with how is everyone doing personally, and it certainly isn't the environment that you would wish on anyone or any world or any country. However, I think what the pandemic has forced us to do is to really care for each other's well-being. So I love that beginning question. How I'm personally doing, I'm blessed. I'm doing well. And I'm doing well because I'm healthy. And that's something that one takes for granted. And I think the pandemic has brought that much more in focus on just being thankful for being healthy every day. And I'm with my family. I have an 11-month-old who's soon to be 1 this month. So it's actually been a blessing to be home and have the privilege to work from home. So I've been able to see her grow up. And I'm also blessed to see my 4.5-year-old grow up and take him to school in the morning and pick him up from school in the evening. So all those things put everything else in perspective. As far as our business, I think it's been a big transition to have to manage against, and I'm sorry for the background noise. That's the one thing with the pandemic, you never know when landscapers are going to show up. So excuse me, but it should be over soon. But I'm really excited, at least for how my company has adapted to this environment. And the way we've adapted is everyone's been home, but we've really used tools like Zoom, Google Meets, and collaboration tools to work together and still be able to complete great work for our team. So I'm very appreciative of that and thankful that we've been able to make that adjustment.
Well, I think your point about gratitude and finding those moments throughout the day to be thankful it really puts things in perspective. And I couldn't agree with you more, both personally and professionally. And congratulations on your 11th month that's about to turn 1. And I too have 2 young ones at home. So I understand the beautiful nature of working from home, and also some of the wonderful, interesting challenges that also comes with working from home as well. Let's talk a bit about your journey. How did you design your career path? And what do you think were some of the key strategic choices you made that position you to become president of the National Journal? And the reason why I asked this question is because of the fact that we've seen for the last couple of months, a lot of companies in private industry trying to think about different ways to increase the pipeline within their workforce. And I think that you have an interesting story to tell that might help shape other companies, particularly those leaders who are watching us today.
It's a great question. I had a career path that wasn't necessarily settled from the beginning of my career. And what I mean by that is I went to Georgetown University, I graduated, and I had a couple of ideas on things that I'd want to do in the future, but I wasn't convicted about anything. So what I decided to do is let's look for a company that I feel will give me a good entry point into the workforce, and that at least from what I could see in the interview process, is a meritocracy. So while I'm figuring out what do I want to do in the future, I do know if I work hard, if I put my all into something and I deliver value to a company, that I could be promoted and I could continue to explore different areas that I may be interested in. So that's what I decided to do. And when I was hired at National Journal right out of college, in fact, I was hired my senior week at Georgetown. So just in the nick of time where I wasn't going to be going home and staying with my parents. So right after I graduated, I started 2 weeks after that. And I started in an entry-level sales position. And then that really gave me an opportunity to be in an environment where what I did was all that mattered, the results that I delivered. There was a scoreboard for me. To make a long story short, I stayed in the sales side of our organization for 4 years, and National Journal proved to be exactly what I was looking for. As a meritocracy, I began getting promoted based on the value that I was able to create. And then about 4 years in, I was able to participate, and to your point on building a pipeline, I was able to participate in a strategy exercise for the company where they chose some of the top performers throughout the company to participate in this exercise. In my ability to work with senior executives, to speak into some of the things that they were thinking about as far as for the future of the company, and as well as to listen to them and how they were going about making decisions, the things that they were concerned about, that really focused me in on what I wanted to do. And after doing that exercise, I really decided on a path that I wanted to go into, a path that was entrepreneurial, that involved product development and strategy, that eventually I could be prepared to run my own business or start my own business. So once I settled on that, I started to pursue it. And the great thing about National Journal is I was developed into that. So our chairman, who I got an opportunity to meet after us getting to know each other, made me a tremendous offer. And it was really an offer that changed the trajectory of my career. And what he said was, he saw at least my vision for my career and thought that there were a lot of things at National Journal that essentially would be mutually beneficial, that I could start moving towards the things I want to do in the future while continuing to deliver value for the company. So he gave me the opportunity to move over to the product development and strategy side of our company. And I began being able to research new products that would eventually be kind of the lifeline in the future of the company. But at the time that I started, it was really us exploring different markets that we could serve, different products that we can create. And again, to make a long story shorter, I began moving up through that side of the company. And began getting promoted as I was able to deliver value. And then that found myself in being promoted to president. It was 11 years into my career at National Journal. And now I've been president for 4 years. And I was able to take with me a lot of different experiences that happened for two reasons. One, I was always open to new opportunities. And I would run after new opportunities, whether it was part of my job or not, because my philosophy was, while you're building a career, why don't you learn as much as possible about every portion of business? And that's everything from selling to operations to contract management, whether it's something that is in the spotlight or behind the scenes, you want to know how to do it. So that was always my approach. The second thing was mentorship. So the other offer that our chairman made to me was that he'd personally mentor me. And when I say that, that was a career-changing moment for me, being able to be mentored by the chairman of our company and learn from him his perspectives on everything from managing people to identifying markets that are interesting to explore, to managing tough conversations with staff and on down the line. Really gave me the ability to operate at a high level in the roles that I inhabited, because I was actually being mentored and trained to be successful. So when it came time for me to be promoted to president, which actually was a surprise to me, but when I was promoted, I was ready because of that mentorship that I received. And I call that the biggest blessing of my life. I am a pastor's son. And I am a believer in Christ, and I lead with that. And that really was a moment in my life that was God's hand blessing me. And I took that blessing and applied it and worked hard for where I eventually got my career.
Kevin, I love this story because one of the things we've heard throughout our series, and our CEO talks about this quite a bit, is the fact that, number one, we have a personal responsibility And also there's a private sector responsibility and also a public sector responsibility with regards to addressing the issues of equity, whether it's in the workplace or society more broadly. And what I heard from you was that on a personal level, that you were open, as you had used the term, you were open to new opportunities, that you sought these new opportunities, that you wanted to learn the business of the organization. And from an organizational standpoint, it was very clear that the leadership was looking across the workforce for their high performers, for those who had value, and to really kind of leverage and manage and mentor those key performers in a strategic way that would be mutually beneficial. And then, of course, clearly, when those two things align, you have great magic that happens in terms of both the company benefits as well as the individual's benefit as well. A question for you as a follow-up to that. One is, what's your take on mentorship relative to sponsorship? And then I would love to talk to you about this major initiative that we have at AARP called Disrupt Aging.
It's a great question. I mean, mentorship to me is one of the most important things that can be happening within a company. And I certainly benefited greatly from having a mentor. But why I think it's so important is it allows staff at whatever level they're at to be able to get perspective, one, on skills that they should be improving, that they want to improve, that they'll need for the future. But the second thing is it really helps individuals solidify their future. And what I mean by that is often you get into the workforce and you get into a job and you just get into a track. That you may love that track or you may not, but people get into a track and they keep pursuing a promotion or growth in that track, whether it's right for them or not. What mentors can do is really focus you in on, okay, what are your skills? What are your strengths? Let's talk about that. And then after we learn about your skills and strengths, then let's apply that to a future path for you. And why that's important is once you learn what your skills and strengths are, you then you have a greater ability to be successful in whatever you choose, because you're matching what we call within National Journal 90th percentile skill with the actual work that you're doing. So that becomes important. It's important for the organization because you have people doing roles and handling parts of your organization that are naturally going to be good at the things that they handle. And for the person, you feel fulfilled, you feel excited about your work, you feel engaged within the organization. And I think mentors are the individuals that help get more people there. So to your question on sponsorship, equally as important, especially for people of color, right? So for people of color, when you come into an organization, and often, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, there's not a lot of people that look like you that are within the organization. So we as humans are naturally attracted to people who look like us, think like us, are interested in the same things as us. So it's really easy for you to get lost quickly. What sponsorship can do is you have people that are going to take a personal investment in your growth, in your future, and then move you along within the organization and make sure you don't get lost. And that's really important. And again, speaking to people of color, women, just representatives or communities that are underrepresented in the workforce, sponsors can be that bridge between you becoming lost within the organization, within your career, to there being a special spotlight put on you to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to bring on Gary as part of the conversation to join us. And as Gary come on to the virtual stage, I really think that as many companies, and we're seeing this particularly in private industry and corporate America, they're really grappling with trying to figure out ways in which to build that pipeline. And as you talked about, Kevin, particularly for communities of color, for women and other groups who have traditionally not been at the table, that is taken on significant urgency, and they're trying to figure out the different strategies and approaches. So Gary, from your vantage point at NYU, in the work that you've done in private industry, what are some of the different approaches are you seeing that companies are taking to build that diverse workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gene, and thank you for having me. At first glance, people may look at this panel and not think it's that diverse, but I'm a happy member of the AARP. I have a son who actually, and a daughter who's actually has birthdays this month, but they're in their mid to late 20s, so actually mid 20s. So there are some differences. I also know Kevin mentioned you went to Georgetown, and my undergraduate institution was Syracuse. So there's definitely some not a lot of diversity in terms of the rivalry between those schools. So I just had to represent Syracuse real quick. But it's great to be here and part of this conversation. It is so important. I think Kevin had some great points. From the perspective of, the companies we're seeing that we've had dialogue with, I think they're starting to realize that they need to build different types of relationships, not just with a school like NYU, but also with certain programs within NYU that maybe have programming for certain audiences. And we have those. We have programs that are for underrepresented populations, people identify as Black, people identify as Latinx, people are low income, first generation. We're proud to say about 15% of our incoming students tend to be first generation students. And so I think initially companies were thinking, well, we need to, come to campus, say that we want to recruit all different types of people, but ultimately they realized that that's not going to do it by itself. And so some are engaged in either offering scholarships for students and starting to realize that this process needs to happen even before they get to the collegiate level, and participating in pipeline programs to get students more engaged in thinking about career options. Because that's what we find is that there's many students that come to a competitive environment like NYU and NYU Stern School of Business, and some of their peers, their parents were a consultant or they were an investment banker, and so they have a leg up. And so we're trying to engage companies in terms of helping initially to educate our students on these career paths and opportunities, and then down the road consider them for maybe a summer internship, and then ultimately full-time hiring position. So I think there's a nice trend we're seeing. It's still a lot of work to be done from really all angles in terms of how to maximize that opportunity. But I think companies do know today that it can't just be come to campus and hope that whatever diversity we have, gravitates to them.
Thank you for sharing that, Gary, because what I'm also seeing is this relationship between companies and universities, really trying to find that nice sweet spot, as you indicated before, and really thinking more broadly about what's the workforce of the future going to look like, and how can they be more intentional on the front end of building that pipeline. I have a question for both of you. We have this major initiative called Disrupt Aging. And I want to kind of pick up on something that Gary said in terms of diversity. And one of the angles that we've been talking about is also the diversity of age. And what Disrupt Aging is about is really challenging outdated beliefs about what it means to age in America. It's really to grapple with the negative stereotypes that comes with aging. And in particular, we spoke to Mayor Michael Tubbs, who you may know has a HBO documentary about Stockton, California, where he describes that, many people have called him the youngest mayor in the city's history. And for Kevin and for you, I would love to get your thoughts on, we would be interested, what are some of the challenges you think that might come with aging, particularly this whole notion that you are either too old to use technology, or you may be too young to supervise or lead a company. So maybe Kevin, I'll start with you. We would be interested to hear about any challenges you may have faced along the way and how you overcame some of those negative stereotypes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think from the age standpoint, especially being younger and holding supervisory roles within an organization, and then holding roles in which obviously I'm over the entire organization. I think one of the biggest challenges I've always had is often when I sit down at a table, you overcome the assumption, or there is the assumption that I shouldn't be at the table. There's certainly that feeling as being a person of color and looking around the table and being the only person of color sitting there. But I think I also feel it from the age side, and that's actually usually where I get assumptions where I've been asked questions equivalent to, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" In sitting in different groups, to assumptions because I represent an information services and media company that, this is off the record, assuming that I'm a writer there, and that's why I would be in a room in which every other person was a senior executive, and I was the one writer that got into the room. But how I found that I seek to overcome it, and I'm usually successful in overcoming it, is being overly prepared. And I try to prepare myself for every environment I'm going into, everything from the people who are in the room and having a background on who they are. I think that also is generally throughout your career, respect. That's a respect thing. All of my mentees now, I tell them, anytime you go into a room, do some research on the people who are in the room. They'll show that you respect their time, you respect the meeting, you respect the room. And I certainly apply that. The other thing is, as far as on the topics being discussed, I seek to try to be the smartest on that topic. What I'm not saying, and I think this is important, I'm not saying I am the smartest on that topic. I think humility is important. But what I'm saying is I try to prepare to know everything about the topic that I can. And that quickly gains people's respect. The age thing quickly falls down when I can speak with knowledge about the topic that is being discussed. When I stand in front of my company, the same thing, that they will look at me not as the 37-year-old president, that they would look at me as the person who knows the most about where the company needs to go, and that I show that to them, and I back that up time and time again. So I think it's no matter how old you are, I think these things apply, but certainly when you're on the younger side and you're placed in positions of authority, it's really important that you can gain people's respect on the merits as far as are you knowledgeable, are you prepared for the decisions that you need to make or the things that you need to speak to.
Gary, anything you'd like to add with regards to the whole notion of age stereotypes and how that might actually hinder one's professional growth?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll speak to actually both sides of things. Ageism does exist. Obviously there's laws about age discrimination, but that doesn't mean that ageism doesn't exist. And I'll tell you from two different perspectives. A lot of people look at institutions of higher learning, particularly really respected ones, as ones that have the older professor, and we've had professors that were as old as 99, still being active. But on the other side of things, it's interesting. I've had conversations with senior deans at other institutions about how they don't want to admit a PhD that is, say, over 25 in terms of a PhD program, or they don't want to hire someone that is too old, actually, because their mindset is they want 40 years of good research out of that person. And the reason why that plays an impact is because the intersection with some of these other social identities. So, because of the lack of generational wealth in the Black community, for example, someone may not say right after college, I'm going to go into a PhD program. They may say, I need to get a job. I mean, I know that's what I did, and so now you're eliminating certain parts of the population because you're saying, well, they have to be a certain age, so and then you look at some of these senior, you look at some of these really respected institutions and you look at the PhD programs, it's not too diverse. And so then the challenge is when you're hiring PhD graduates, you're saying, well, we want to go to these top schools, no diversity there. So how do you then diversify? So it starts with one thing, but it triggers another thing. On the other side of things, it's interesting because sometimes you'll see an organization say, you know, we're gonna ask this person who used to be a CEO or someone who's pretty senior to come back to our organization and lead, you know, and so they're maybe not as concerned because they're bringing in somebody. But similarly, you know, 90 something percent of Fortune 500 CEOs are men. The majority of them are white men. And so when you ever see those situations, someone who is maybe older, or maybe, you know, maybe they retired and they're bringing them back for this turnaround stint, it's typically not that diverse. You know, it's very rarely is it women, very rarely people of color. And so age has a factor when you factor in some of these other, you know, social identities. And so when people do kind of go out of the norm and say, we're going to look at someone who might have more experience, they typically are looking at someone that is a white male. So I think the problem is that you can't subtract out some of these other social identities. A lot of times people, you know, typically are saying we're going to focus on one thing, but they're ignoring some of the other ones.
Yeah, I think that's a very a good point there. And we know from some of the research that's been done lately, particularly from the Kellogg Foundation, they found that if we were able to actually advance equity, racial equity in this case, it would actually increase economic activity by 8 trillion by 2050. So in other words, that the inequities that we see is actually hampering and stifling our economic growth. And at AARP back in January, we actually released a report looking at the cost of age discrimination. And what we found was the fact that age discrimination cost the United States roughly about $850 billion in 2018. So again, the isms, whether that's racism, whether that's sexism, whether that's ageism, really hampers our economic growth. Before I turn to Ian, my colleague, for some Q&A, I did want to have one last question. And we saw a couple of months ago from the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon. He released a letter, and it was really a call to action to private industry, the public and private nonprofit sectors, and philanthropy about their need to really build a coalition to address a lot of the historic inequities that we're seeing. As leaders in both private and nonprofit sectors, what do you think should be the role of these sectors in addressing some of the inequities that we see?
Oh, I can start. You know, I think that that effort is noble and good, but I think the challenge is that most organizations look at the concepts of diversifying as a good thing to do, maybe as a way to make up for the lack of reparations if you talk about race. But the reality of it is to your point, you know, the Kellogg Foundation, other research, the research in the last 5 years has pretty much indicated that diverse organizations that are balanced produce better results financially. And, you know, just like any organization has an intention to deliver a certain sales number, positive revenues, they typically don't have an intention to diversify. They have a hope to diversify. I want to diversify. But just like you're saying, we have to deliver this much to the bottom line. That mindset needs to apply to, we have to diversify, because if we don't, our environment isn't as competitive, our culture isn't as good. And companies typically don't like to go there because they're implying that their culture isn't perfect. And the reality of it is there's no perfect culture. And a lot of times people use that word, well, we want someone who's going to fit our culture. It's a very biased statement. You know, the mindset needs to be, how do we enhance our culture? Why are we assuming our culture is perfect? And so the mindset has to change. So I'm not saying that I disagree with Jamie Dimon's approach, but it can't just be that. It has to be, we are not as good as we can be until we diversify, because then it becomes an initiative and an intention versus doing diversity for the good. It needs to be to make them better as organizations.
Kevin?
Yeah, just to piggyback on Gary there, I think he hit the nail on the head in the sense that diversity has to be looked at as a strategic priority. And I think too often it's looked at as a risk management strategy, right? So we think it's good to diversify, but really it's more of a brand exercise. I think the companies you see that have shifted from that mindset to saying, no, this is really important to our success as an organization. And then if you extrapolate that out to what if governments started to think like that, because there's a public policy aspect to this. And then you have corporate America thinking like this, and you have the education system changing that mindset to, we should diversify, whether it's a reparations mindset, if it's a risk management mindset, but because this is going to make us more successful in the future, we should build policies that promote and encourage diversity within our organizations, within our institutions, because it actually is going to be beneficial to the bottom line of governments. It will produce more tax revenue. To the bottom line of companies, it will produce more revenue in companies. Educational institutions will start to be better feeder patterns into this change of mindset. So I love that point, and this piggyback on that needs to be the shift.
Well, thank you both. Now I'm going to bring to the stage Ian. Ian is one of my amazing colleagues at AARP, and who's done such an amazing job in helping to make today possible. So Ian?
Yeah, so Kevin and Gary, it's great to see you, and I'm going to go through some audience Q&A, and I think one of the questions that's come up a couple times in the Q&A has been, what are some examples, whether it be across industries or companies, that really have success in developing a more diverse workforce? Are there kind of leaders, and maybe it's National Journal Group, NYU, or others, who people could look to who are tuning in today and say, wow, that should kind of be our North Star?
I can start. I think there's there's a couple organizations, but I think one sticks out. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Procter Gamble case study, where within their organization they began to reach out to their ERG groups, so their employee resource groups, and within their Black American / African American ERG group, there was discussion around their products. And the discussion around their products was, especially from the Black woman, we have all these hair care products, but there is not a product that actually is specifically designed for women of color. And when you match the dollars being spent, and this goes back to my point that this is good business. Diversity is good business. The dollars being spent by women of color on hair care products, that dollar was very significant. So Procter & Gamble's leadership looked at that and said, wow, we're missing out on a big part of the market share. And they developed products that were geared towards women of color, and then had a partnership with Walmart. And Walmart, again, was taking that same journey. And they were thinking, wow, our stores, people of color are big consumers of our stores, and there's no display, there's nothing that's geared towards their dollar. And they formed a partnership, and it ended up being a huge business win for both organizations. So going back to my point on diversity is good for the bottom line, that is just a case study or an example of organizations that leaned into it, and then the reward they got for that, where they switched from it being risk management to being part of their strategy.
Yeah, the organization that comes to mind for me is the U.S. Army. I think there's very few organizations that draws from a really diverse audience, regardless of socioeconomic status or race or gender. And certainly this is over time, right? So at one point the Army probably wasn't that way, but if you think about the mindset, Army of one and connectivity, I think about the Army and the military because I think about, some of our students that have come back to get their MBA, and military veterans, they've worked with diverse groups. They've worked with all different types of people. And this concept of leave no person behind, this concept of there's times that I need to lead, because there's an obligation, there's a service to do so, and there's times I need to follow. And it's depending on what the structure of the organization and the task is at hand. And so I think that that's an organization that by nature of needing, bodies has learned how to become a very diverse organization. Again, they're not perfect, but they've understood that everyone's in this together. There's no hierarchy, and there's respect of levels based on skill set and appointment, not by any of these other social identities that sometimes come into play with other organizations.
It's really interesting you say that, Gary, because as Gene mentioned at the outset, we had a 2-day summit on equity, and General Colin Powell spoke exactly about that no person left behind, and how that influenced his entire career. And obviously, he's reached the highest levels as being in the State Department and working with the White House. So a second question here, and then as we get towards the end, is best practices for people that may be having challenges in a kind of working through a diverse pipeline. So I think this is coming from somebody who is in HR or talent management, but how do you make sure that your pipeline is as diverse as you want it to be? And are there any tips or best practices in your National Journal or at NYU that you're seeing that you would recommend to our audience?
I'll start. I'll say the key thing is, expanding your network. There's lots of research that shows that most people's network is pretty homogenous, whether it's professional or social. And, 85, they estimate something like 85% of jobs, you have to apply, but 85% of jobs are through networking. And so unless you intentionally expand your network, you're not going to really have much success. And the key is to figure out, where do I need to expand my network, according to all these different social identities, whether it's age, race, gender, any of these. How do I expand my network? There's, all these social identities have organizations that creates community for members of that social identity. So it's not too hard to identify those organizations. And the key with networking is you do it before you have a need, so you build these relationships way in advance. And when something becomes available, you can rely on that network for potential employees.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I think that that's really important, that you are, as an organization, forming partnerships with either educational institutions, professional organizations that have the different types of people that you're seeking to recruit into your organization. And you actually, I have a saying, you work it, which means that it's not something you do just to say you have, and you can put it on your website that you have the partnership. Actually take it really seriously, have a plan of action, review that plan of action every quarter to see if you're following up on steps, have accountability measures in place. All of that will move you into a direction of being able to start to develop a pipeline, because you'll be hooked in to the places that you need to be hooked in to feed that pipeline.
Yeah, I love that.
All right, Gary, go ahead.
Just to really quickly build on Kevin's point, I love this idea of working it. Like there's organizations that you can even join. It's not that you just go to whatever they're doing. And we do that at NYU Stern. We there's an organization I used to be on the board for. It's called Forte, and it focused on women pursuing business careers. And for me, it was great to be on the board to build community with women that were going to share, what are some of the challenges for women making that transition. So it's more than just saying, I'm going to go to this event. It's making an investment of some sort. We're really building that network.
Yeah, active participation sounds really key, and I've actually got some great advice just for me on this. So we really appreciate, Kevin and Gary, your time. Gene, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, or I think we'll move forward from here. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Kevin Turpin, CEO of National Journal Group, and Gary Fraser, the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at NYU Stern for Business, and Gene Accius. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I just want to end here by closing out and talking a little bit about AARP's work for the past 60 years. They've fought to build for a more equitable society, advocating for policies and programs that empower people to live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. And it really has been our privilege this afternoon to spend this time with two leaders who are focused on building a diverse workforce that provide economic opportunity to local communities and hearing their insight and solutions and how we can make a real measurable difference in the years to come. And so to learn more about AARP's efforts, you can please visit aarp.org/buildequity. And we look forward to hosting you one final time in 2020 with our partners at the Social Innovation Summit. Our final program will take place in early December. So please check your email for an invite. And thank you very much for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.